Hello, I'm Paul Feely, the Middle East Partnership Officer for the Episcopal Church. Welcome to one of our feature presentations as we celebrate the centennial of the Good Friday offering. This year, we're celebrating a century of gifts and rejoicing in 2,000 years of good news. For the past 100 years, Episcopalians have generously shared their love, compassion, and financial gifts to support ministry in the Anglican Communion province of Jerusalem in the Middle East. These gifts have made an amazing difference in the lives of many people in the homeland of Jesus and beyond. Why is it that when a person retires, they end up busier than when they worked full time? Our guest today, although retiring in 2006, makes that statement exceptionally true as he presents at and leads conferences and retreats nationally and internationally throughout his ministry, spanning a variety of topics, including ecumenism, evangelism, spirituality, and theology. Frank Griswold, the 25th presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, actually prefers to call it pensioned than retired. Bishop Frank served as the presiding bishop and primate from 1998 to 2006, and before becoming the presiding bishop, he was the Bishop of Chicago. He was a member of the Joint Standing Committee of the Primates of the Anglican Communion and the Anglican Consultative Council. He co-chaired the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission from 1998 to 2003, and a member of the Standing Committee for the 1998 Lambeth Conference. He also served on diocesan, national, and international committees for liturgy, worship, and ecumenism. He had to deal with many issues around war, peace, bigotry, and injustice in the Middle East in his time as presiding bishop. He spoke directly to issues in calling for the settlement of differences in just and lasting ways. Quoting an article about him, the author wrote, "As presiding bishop, during some very tumultuous times, I've always admired Frank's courage and a sense of servant ministry, and how he worked tirelessly to present a way the church could work together on difficult issues and move forward. Frank represented an important voice of inclusion and advocacy within mainstream Christian denominations. Frank Griswold retained a stability and orthodoxy that appreciated sound biblical interpretation and what a welcoming Episcopal church looked like. We are a better church because we had leaders like him defending the faith. We are indeed a better church, and it's a privilege and honor to welcome Bishop Frank Griswold." Bishop, thank you so much for joining us. I mentioned in my opening remarks about the tumultuous time that, at least on a few occasions, you had as presiding bishop. And yet there's a beautiful story about you and prayer and a beach. And I wondered if we might begin by asking you to share that story.
Yes, it was the October after 9/11. And I was at a conference in Florida. I got up one morning because the beach was close at hand and took my Russian prayer rope, which is a series of black woolen knots, and I walked along the seashore. And as I walked along, I noticed a man coming down toward the beach along a path. And something in me said, that man is, I think, Middle Eastern. And I experienced, much to my horror, a kind of shudder of fear. And I thought to myself, I'm the one who wrote about we must be careful not to demonize our Muslim brothers and sisters, and felt so sure that I had managed to avoid that trap. And yet here I had this sudden frisson of fear. In any event, I walked on, and then I became aware of the fact that the man had come down to the beach and was behind me and was slowly catching up to me. And finally, he was beside me. And he asked me what I was doing. And I told him I was praying. And he asked me, what are you praying? And I said, I'm praying the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy upon me. And he said, well, what happens when you pray? And I said, well, I think it sort of opens me to God's own spirit more fully, and opens my consciousness to God's way of looking at the world. I said, I hope that's what's happening when I pray. And I thought, why am I having this conversation? And then he said to me, oh, my father has something very much like that rope you have, and he uses it for his prayer. And I said, well, and what does your father pray? And he said, Father prays Allah, Allah, Allah. And I realized that I was talking to a Muslim. And he asked me who I was, and I told him who I was, and he produced a card, and he was the head of the Islamic Center in that part of Florida. And I thought, this is amazing. We've had this conversation because of prayer, and it's about prayer. And I thought, in that instant, I thought, the prayer I'm praying has enveloped us both. To open yourself to God is to be open to God's amazing ability to embrace the totality of humanity. And here is my Muslim brother, and he's discovered his Christian brother. And it's as we've prayed together, or as we've explored the reality of prayer, that we can discover this unity. And I think so much can be healed when we actually open ourselves to God's Spirit, which is all about communion, union, and reconciliation. I feel that's the essential ministry of the church. And it's through prayer that we are purified, our consciousnesses are liberated from the various traps that engulf us and create judgments and negativities. And I felt actually God's divine sense of humor was at work in this whole thing. You know, I thought so proudly that I'd written about not being biased toward Muslims. I thought, oh, I have this wonderful spirit. And God showed me that I wasn't quite as free as I thought I was. And he worked a deeper freedom by bringing the two of us together, all because of a prayer rope, a Russian prayer rope.
You know, it's amazing, isn't it? The way that God does work on a beach in Florida.
Exactly.
You also traveled, I know, many times to the Middle East, and the Good Friday offering supports hospitals, schools, orphanages, and other programs. And that the places that we have and are supported are always places that work for the benefit of all people in the province of Jerusalem in the Middle East, Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike. I know that you must have visited some of the schools and churches and hospitals and other places. Can you tell us something of those visits, or something that you remember from being present with people?
I think the thing that, I'll just take schools, for example. And I was thinking of particularly the school in Nazareth. The schools are Christian. They're overseen by Christians, but they welcome everyone. And the majority of the students in many of these schools are not Christian, they're Muslim, at least in the Middle East. And I also am aware of the fact that in some parts of the Middle East, any kind of evangelization is frowned upon. So you present, what would I say, a lived Christianity in the form of service, medical service or educational service, and that is welcomed. But at the same time, just by virtue of offering these services, you are inviting people to experience Christianity not as a dogmatic reality, but as a lived reality that reaches out to those in need. So I feel there's a a very subtle example, but absolutely real. I mean, God cares for all God's children. And so being available with the gifts that have been woven into our lives as Christians, and to share those gifts in a way that upbuilds other people in other cultures, in other religious traditions, I think is actually being obedient to the larger purposes of God. So I'm grateful for the hospitals and the schools that we support. And I think it's very important that we have that kind of lived kindness that serves people and allows people to say, well, I'm not so sure I believe in Christianity as a faith, but I certainly believe in Christianity because of what it does for me or for my family, what it does for the community. So it's seen as a positive good. Who knows what the fruit ultimately is, you know? Sometimes there are quiet conversions. I've run into people who, under cover of darkness, come and seek baptism because it would be too fraught if they did this openly. And what has drawn them is the love and compassion and care that they've experienced at the hands of Christian educators and Christian medical staff.
I know when you talk about evangelism being illegal, that's particularly true in the Gulf states, where they're really challenged in terms of really presenting the gospel by simply being present and sharing, you know, in the loving way that as you described it. I know too, when you took groups or pilgrims to the Middle East, particularly Jerusalem, did they get an accurate picture of what was going on?
The times I've done that, I've always had a Palestinian guide and a Palestinian Christian guide, not always an Anglican, I mean, Roman Catholic and others, but in any event, it's been very interesting to take people who know very little about that part of the world. I mean, they've read something, they know something about the conflict and the divisions within Israel, Palestine, but to actually experience things. I mean, for instance, I remember driving with a group of people who had very little experience or knowledge into the countryside, and to our right at the top of a hill was a great settlement with gleaming new buildings, and to our left down in the valley was a village with very poor buildings and the cisterns on the top of the roof, which is always a sign of a Palestinian village. And several people in the bus said, well, why are they so different? And I said, well, that's a settlement and that's a Palestinian village. And they were shocked and upset. How can this be? This isn't fair. And there's a great deal to be said for taking people, letting them experience visibly and in more concrete ways by visiting some institutions, and not sort of preparing them ahead of time so that they ask questions rather than you've given them all the answers before they've had the experience. And I think that really is the way people are shaped and formed. I love, the Bethlehem, basically is a prison with this security wall that goes around it. And the English artist Bansky owns a hotel, which he's called the Waldorf Hotel, sort of a play on Waldorf in New York. And indeed, it's within 20 feet of the security wall. And, an experience like that, I mean, sometimes humor also is more trenchant than just anger. And people experiencing that, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense. And they're written on the wall once. It was divisio peccatum. Division is a sin. And it was Origen who said that. So these experiences are what change people and help them to see what really is going on. And hopefully then respond, by such things as the Good Friday offering.
I know in your time, both in the United States and also, of course, in the Middle East, that you met many famous Christian leaders, but many politicians as well. I wanted to read you a quote from the long and rather famous longtime serving mayor, Teddy Kollek of Jerusalem. He once wrote this: Jerusalem's people of differing faiths, cultures, and aspirations must find peaceful ways to live together other than by drawing a line in the sand. And I just wondered if you shared that former wonderful mayor's idea about the cooperation of the differing faiths in Jerusalem.
Absolutely. In fact, I remember a visit to him in which he said with great passion, he said, "You Christians are very important because you are sort of a buffer between us and the Muslim community, and you're all about love. And that is so important." So it really, it was sort of in line with what you just read as his own view. Peace, the peace that God supplies when we recognize one another as brothers and sisters. Peace not just as the containment of animosity, but peace as a transformation of one's heart, healing of one's heart. And I think that's what the deeper message is. And isn't it interesting that Jerusalem means city of peace? And yet, if you go to the old city, this tiny area, this tiny walled area, you have every division that exists within the human community. You have the Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, and then within those communities, you have various national groups and, what would I say, sub-faith groups, that are more this way or that way within that particular tradition. And I really do believe that, in a sense, Jerusalem is sacramental. It's an outward and visible sign of division, and yet it is called to be a sign of peace. And when in fact Jerusalem lives into its name, there will be peace around the world. In that sense, it really is the center of the universe, in that every division is there, and when they're healed, every division will be healed everywhere else.
Do you find yourself discouraged or disappointed about the lack of progress in the Middle East?
Yes, I do. And I think one thing that we often don't understand in the West is the enduring reality of memory. And for instance, I remember calling on the Grand Mufti in Jerusalem, and I was told very clearly before I entered his presence that I must apologize for the Crusades. And I thought, what do you mean? The Crusades are centuries ago. And my guide said, no, they are just as present now as they were then, because memory is very long in this part of the world. And so I went in and I said, I'm so sorry, as though I personally had, led troops into the city. But I think that is a real problem. These long-held animosities or judgments that go back centuries. I mean, you see it at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You have 7 or 8, I think, I'll have to back up and count them, but a number of denominations, primarily the Orthodox, the Armenians, and the Roman Catholics. But then you have various Copts and Ethiopians and Syrians as well. And, it's a madhouse at times as these various communities sort of fight for the sort of primary shrines. And I think at times, God has to wring God's hands if God has hands, or maybe smile and say, oh, my children, you're all one. And isn't it interesting that the key to the door to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre has been held for centuries by a Muslim family, because none of the Christians trust one another to have the key. I mean, it's very interesting. So these things, I find invitations, not in some short order to overcome, but invitations clearly to be followed up on in terms of how you can build relationships. I do think the heads of the churches in Jerusalem now are much closer together than they used to be. and that's good. So sometimes various oppositions push people together in a way that resolves things that one can enjoy when there is no opposition.
There's some wonderful humanitarian work that goes right across Cyprus, the Gulf states, Jerusalem, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, all that come from the gifts of the Good Friday offering. And in one of your Good Friday letters, you quoted the Bishop of Jerusalem, and he said, quoting him, you said this: "The words of the Bishop of Jerusalem make plain the importance of the Good Friday offering." And the bishop went on to write, "I'd like to take this opportunity to share my joy and express my appreciation to the Episcopal Church for working so diligently to support the Diocese of Jerusalem. I have no words to express my deep gratitude. Kindly convey my personal thanks and that of the diocese clergy and laity to all our brothers and sisters in Christ." It would seem from all that you have said that our Good Friday gifts certainly do make a difference.
Oh, they make a profound difference. There's no question about it. And the resources that we entrust to our brothers and sisters in that particular province do immense good. And I just couldn't support the Good Friday offering more fully than I can, because of its incredible consequence in terms of things like hospital equipment or medicine or laptops for kids in school, all kinds of things that benefit the human community and serve humankind.
I want to ask you one last question, if I might, and that is about interfaith work. I know that you have been a champion for interfaith work, and I want to ask you in a moment about the Elijah Interfaith Institution, but our Good Friday gifts support the dioceses in the Middle East, and they themselves have clergy and laity who are involved in interfaith work and dialogue. Do you see that as one of the possible ways forward in trying to achieve peace? And could you just say a word too about the Elijah Interfaith Institution that you're part of?
I think when people of various faith communities can work together in some common focused work that benefits a particular community or addresses a particular problem, I think that is probably the most important way in which faiths can discover one another as brothers and sisters, and not simply an alien theological position. I mean, so often, and I've seen this particularly in the Elijah Institute, which you just mentioned. I mean, these meetings in various parts of the world with a theme that sort of transcends any one particular group's sensibilities, something like, what is wisdom in your tradition, or what is contemplation in your tradition, that kind of thing. I find that you actually begin to like, respect, and ultimately feel affection for one another. And it's all carried out, I mean, things like sharing meals or being somewhere that is slightly uncomfortable for everyone, because of let's say, the accommodations. It doesn't hurt. And people are drawn together and find that, yes, the differences exist, but they exist as sort of fascinating differences that you want to explore, as opposed to, oh, I'm not like you, and you sort of back away. So I think this is where the Holy Spirit can work in a very marvelous and subtle way. And I do find it interesting that sharing meals does draw people together in an amazing way. And so I think Jesus is very wise in instituting the Eucharist. Breaking bread is indeed a way of knowing one another in a different way. So I think the interfaith efforts of the churches in the Middle East are very much open to that kind of exploration. And that certainly is what the Elijah Institute in Jerusalem has been about.
Bishop, thank you so very much. We appreciate you taking the time and sharing some of the story from your time as presiding bishop, and also some wisdom that you've given us for going forward for the next 100 years of the Good Friday offering. God bless you, and thank you so much again for your ministry.
And thank you, Paul. Thank you. Blessings on you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.